much as I want you to empower my child who's a student in your classroom, I really want you to help the entire classroom gain the ability to have empathy and realize and help them to realize that we all have our version of one finger to hide if we want to feel ashamed about something.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Independence First for co-sponsoring this event, and thank you to Boswell for hosting us today. As was mentioned, I'm Sally Halderson, and I work at Porchlight Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Porchlight shares space with Independence First down in Walker's Point, locally here, and we also have a shared history with Boswell as Porchlight evolved from the Harry W. Schwartz bookshops, for those of you who are familiar with those. We now primarily ship bulk books all over the world for author and corporate events, so we're really pleased when we're able to do events locally. Today, we have the opportunity to help host Meg Zucker, author of Born Extraordinary, Empowering Children with Differences and Disabilities. Meg was born with a genetic condition that caused her to be limb different, and she would eventually pass that condition on to her two sons. Her adopted daughter has less visible but still significant differences that she must navigate. What makes Born Extraordinary so effective is that Meg writes about her own experience growing up and meeting challenges in an atypical body, how she raised her children to be empowered and resilient, and she includes additional words of wisdom from other parents. Welcome, Meg, and we are all very fortunate that she has agreed to read from her wonderful book to start us out.
Thank you. Is this even on? Can you guys hear me? I'm not sure it is. Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes, that one.
Okay, so I'm laughing. When I was a little girl, apparently my first phrase to my parents was, "I do it myself-y." So when I heard, they're like, should she have a stand? Should she not have a stand? And I was probably like, no, I don't need a stand. I'm good. And then Sally said, "Can you read from the book?" I'm like, oh man, I need the stand. So all good. That's fun. I'm really excited to be here. And actually, as Sally was mentioning, there is a wonderful community of people that contributed to this book. And it really means the world to me that a few of them are here. And so Ryan and Teresa Edlund are here. And if you read the second chapter, they wrote about their son Louis. And Katie Memel is in the back, and she wrote, as well as her son Tony Memel. And then coming, and I'm going to make certain we call them out, is Debbie Cass and her daughter Chloe. And so they're in traffic. But I have to say, and I actually think I was saying to Ryan and Teresa earlier that, and Katie, I think I just said it to you, I do not take for granted that in my sharing my story and asking people to share their stories, they sent me that information in a vacuum. I mean, they had no idea what I was going to write. And that really was sort of blind faith and trust in me to know that I would have their backs, that I would make certain that they were part of something that was not only from my heart, but that could resonate in their own life and family experience. And so my gratitude is so huge when it comes to their contributions. And there's many other families, it takes a village, they say, and there are many other families with stories of having children with differences or disabilities. And so, it is really my honor to write this, but also my, honor that, or I feel honored that, contributors decided to come for this journey. So with that, I'm going to read a little bit of the introduction, and then we can get started.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and then I joked also that I was wearing contacts, and that's my true disability, because when I wear my contacts, I can't see, so I had to take out my contacts to read. We can all relate. It's called, as my eye doctor said, it's AGE, which I'm like, what's that? She's like, age.
Well done.
Oh well. The first time I learned that my genetic condition had a name was when I was at a medical exam when I was applying to law school. My doctor was completing a required form for me, and on the final line, he wrote something unrecognizable. Ectrodactyly. What's that? I asked, staring at the piece of paper, confused. To me, the word sounded more like a type of dinosaur, and when he explained it was simply a medical term rooted in Greek that meant missing digits, I felt a surge of disappointment. Telling me I was limb different wasn't exactly news, and I was on my own on this adventure, since neither my parents, brothers, nor any relative shared my condition. When I was growing up, and other kids constantly asked why I looked so different, I explained that I was born this way, and my mom had eaten some spoiled fish while pregnant with me. It was as good as any guess, so I stuck to it for years. Growing up, I'd never met anyone who looked like me, not in person, not on television, not even in my wildest dreams. Well, maybe once. The closest I'd ever come was on one hot summer evening at a county fair in central Illinois. Among the carnival rides and games, there was also a freak show with people on display. It included a pair of conjoined twins, a bearded lady, and a middle-aged man with missing fingers and toes. I stared at him in horror, and in response, he stared back at me. But before he looked away, he offered a nod with a strange expression, as if to say, "You're like me." What would have been more useful, however, was if my doctor could have let me in on the news that my condition was not only genetic, but also autosomal dominant. That meant I had a 50% chance of passing ectrodactyly onto my children. Now that would have mattered. For much of my youth and into my 20s, I chose to remain in denial, believing that my genetic mishap would start and end with me. Why? My greatest fear was passing it along to my offspring. They would blame me, and I would blame myself. When I shared that with my now husband, John, before we got engaged, he poo-pooed me. "Geez, Meg, what are you so afraid of?" John hates when I try to, if you listen to the Audible, I try to sound like John. Okay, so now he's not here, so I can sound however I want. "What are you afraid of? You came out great, and even if our kids inherit it, they will follow your lead." I have my own mom and dad to thank for that. Their unconditional support has shaped the confident person and unwavering parent I've become. Although I was born in the United States, much of my childhood was spent in 5 countries across the Middle East and South Asia. There, my ability to be resilient was constantly tested. When we moved to Iran, beggars on the street would run for the hills, worried they might catch my condition or my family's presumed curse. When I lived in Cairo, Egypt, and Islamabad, Pakistan, people would pass me on the street and let out loud murmurs of pity. In Kabul, Afghanistan, my own nanny was afraid of me. But there were upsides to my experiences abroad. In Israel, we lived in an apartment, and our landlady was named Regina. She had moved from Wisconsin to Jerusalem with her best friend, named Golda Meir, who later became the Prime Minister. One day, Golda was visiting Regina and saw me playing outside. She stopped before entering the building, stared at my small, disfigured hands for a moment, and then whispered in my ear, "You are enough." I was startled by her boldness. Up until that moment, any stranger that had ever encountered me had only shown uncertainty, fear, or pity. Although I was too young to fully appreciate it, Golda sought to reassure me that no matter what I looked like, I would get through a lifetime of pity, stares, and false assumptions about my abilities just by being me. Her words would one day capture my own life commitment to unconditional self-love. And yet, as important as the encouragement was, it would be up to my parents to help me believe it. Because when the world takes one glance at you and reminds you of everything you aren't, you need to rely on constant reinforcement at home to remind you of everything you are. As it turned out, my prayers of not passing on ectrodactyly went unheeded. Ethan was born with 1 finger on each hand and 2 toes on each foot, and a few years later, his brother Charlie was born with 2 fingers on each hand and 2 toes on each foot. There wasn't much of a chance that their younger sister, Savannah, would share our genetic condition because she was adopted at birth. Even so, Savannah would have her own invisible differences. Beyond the adoption, she developed a severe allergy to nuts and would later be diagnosed with ADHD. Altogether, thanks to my genetics, Ethan, Charlie, and I have 18 fingers and toes combined. I'll let that sink in for a minute. In my case, the cause was certain, so I used to think I was uniquely tormented by the guilt of our sons being born different. But in speaking to countless parents, I have come to realize I'm hardly alone. My own mother tells me that she was tortured by a pediatrician who suggested that had she not eaten a rotten potato chip early in her pregnancy with me, I'd have been born genetically perfect. And to think I've told all the other kids that it had been some bad fish. My mother agonized over that clueless diagnosis for years. But here's the thing, as is the case for many new parents, the initial feelings of guilt over having a child that is different transforms into unimaginable gushes of love and affection. Elizabeth Brunig described motherhood in a New York Times piece in a way that resonated with me. One of the things they don't tell you about having babies is that you don't ever have a baby, you have your baby, which is to you the sum of all babies. Despite the fact that 2 of our 3 children share my condition, I quickly realized I had so much to learn. Parenting children who were born different was actually not intuitive, not even for me. My parents had done such a brilliant job of raising me to control and conquer, both emotionally and physically, to the best of my ability. How I wish they would have written a guidebook for me to follow. They raised me to be fearlessly independent and follow my passions no matter what. Had they written a book, it would have highlighted the importance of leaning out by resisting the urge to overprotect or prevent me from ever experiencing failure, while never sharing any private reservations about what might or might not be feasible. I blossomed in response. All it takes is a nervous, panicky parent to cause a reluctant child to become apprehensive about trying new things and give up before they've given themselves a chance. As a person who is different and as a mother of children who are different, I'm writing this book to give you the key ingredients necessary to help your child who was born different or disabled or experiences challenges as a result of real or perceived differences to live to their greatest potential. As a parent, you must achieve unconditional self-love before focusing on being the parent they'll need. You'll need to help your child find their dignity in public while providing them the support they'll hunger for at home. You can't make decisions on their behalf based on fear. You need to resist the urge to overprotect while finding the courage to follow their lead. You'll need to preserve their pride as they yearn to be independent, despite a world that perceives them as helpless. You'll discover the benefits of family support that flows both ways. And you'll need to help your children discern between cruelty and curiosity while preparing them for everything. Anything. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much for. Thank you so much for reading from the book. We are here in celebration of this book, and I always like to share, if you'd like to see how much wisdom is in this book, all of these tabs, you'll find a lot. But I in particular was so pleased to be asked to participate in this event, as my life follows a similar trajectory to the story that Meg tells in her book. I was born with an infection in the femur of my left leg that caused my leg and foot to develop more slowly and differently than the rest of me. If not for modern medicine and many childhood surgeries that both lengthened my left leg and shortened my right, I would be in a wheelchair and would have been for most of my life. My legs are now less noticeably different. An orthopedist recently described each of my legs as having been built with a variety of different size Lego blocks. But I grew up different, with a different kind of childhood. And as I age, I deal with more issues, the age again, with mobility and discomfort. Additionally, when my son was born, there were no initial concerns about his health and development, but he failed to hit his milestones, and when he was 11 months old, he began to have seizures. And from that moment on, our lives were never the same. He's now 18, and he has a constellation of developmental disabilities, both physical and cognitive, but no diagnosis. So we live a very different life, and he has a very different kind of childhood. So as I was telling Meg early on when we were chatting here, in many ways this book is the book that I needed 18 years ago, and I hope that this book is available to many more parents who will need it. So we're going to get started with a little bit of diving into the book.
Does anyone have a book?
Yep. Turn that
And thank you for sharing that. I really
I feel like that's one of the takeaways that we can give to this book is the need for community, right? And the need to communicate. And one of the things that either difference or disability does is it has a tendency to make your world smaller unless you have already some inner pursuit of maybe inner confidence, maybe it's inherent self-love. But I think for everyone who is either a new parent to a child with difference or disability, or it evolves over time and you find yourself trying to meet those challenges, that the main thing that you can do is, as Meg says in the book, is find your safe people. And I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about, because throughout the book you talk a lot about other people, whether it's well-intentioned people, whether it's, as you mentioned, cruelty, curiosity, people who want to assist but don't know how. And I'm wondering if you can help us a little bit, because I think where we're at societally right now is that everyone's a little bit afraid to say the wrong thing, even when they mean to do the right thing. And I'd love to hear what you, whether it's advice or thoughts on how we are better at expanding our community when we all have unique challenges.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm actually really embarrassed to say that this is one of those areas where I write about some mistakes I made, and in particular, and then remind me, because I think it's really important to talk about the different types of almost categories that we can say that people can fall into, that you're going to encounter as a parent of someone who's different. But in terms of the mistake, so when I had Ethan and Charlie, in my head I thought, well, why would they need any type of community of kids born like them? Like, they have me. Yes, middle-aged mom, whatever I was, but, or young mom. Well, I guess I was a young mom back then, but it really was one of those things that, and I talk about this in the book. I also, think that the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. And every misstep I ever took as a parent, quite frankly, was rooted in fear. And so in this sense, I think I really feared them not feeling normal. And if they were surrounded by a community of people that look like them, it's terrible, I'm admitting it, but I really, in my head, I'm like, no, they need to just hang out with other, kids so that they can just, they can accept them and they can move on, and, my difference didn't just, define me and so forth. But the reality is that there are safe communities, and in fact, I started to understand that and observe, and especially with some of the parents that would contribute, that they would connect with other families with children of similar experiences. And I really made a mistake there. And when I checked in with Ethan, who's now a junior in college, but I was hoping he would tell me what I wanted to hear, but not Ethan. He's like, I said, so what do you think? Do you feel like that was a mistake? Would you have wished that you would have met someone or spent time? And he said, Mom, I'm really curious. I didn't get that opportunity, and while I'm happy to have the friends I have, I think that could have been a really great way of focusing, on myself in a way that I wasn't able to. So in the book, I really do talk about those communities and the importance of it. And I think it goes both ways. I think it's also really fantastic. I have an entire chapter, maybe we'll get to it, about families and the importance. Your safest community starts out with your family. It's probably why I wrote the book, right? But that goes beyond the family. There's so many people that come into our lives that can serve that purpose. But let me pause there for a second.
Oh, this touches on a number of things, and I'm going to go directly to home and family first. And when we talk about safe places and safe spaces, the first place that you need it to be is in the home. And you talk about how there's so much groundwork to be done for your child at home to be able to deal with the outer world and the different kinds of attempts at independence that they will take out in the world because they can't control what's in the world. And control is another theme that is throughout this book, whether it's what we can control or can't control, whether it is trying to control other people, trying to take action about the things we can control. And one of the things that I wrote a little note here about home as home base, right? Like you're always coming home and coming back to home base. And at home base, that's where you are able to take off from when you have a good, substantial set of tools, right? But I also put here family mottos, because this really resonated with me. I don't know if you'll be able to think right now about some of the family mottos that either what your dad said to you, I think, which was...
Yeah, worry about the things you can do something about.
Right.
Was certainly one of them, if that's
Yep.
what you mean.
Yep.
And the control thing was huge. I mean, I think I wrote in the book at one point, Charlie was on the playground and he was upset and about an encounter, and he was, we went to the swings, and I talked about how kids would approach him and point at him, stare at him, do whatever they were going to do in terms of reaction. And I said, look, when they do that, it's like they're swinging, right? If there's someone else that's swinging, that's out of your control. And he started to look deflated. I'm like, but wait, you have the power over your own swing. You can tell them why you're born this way. You can walk away. You can, have a conversation. So the concepts of control and that understanding of, worry, my dad's saying about worrying about the things that you can do something about really was the way that I would be interacting with my kids. I'm going to stop for a second and recognize Abby Cass and Chloe, who were there and who are part of the book, and so excited to see them joining us today. So
Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
I think that set of tools that I just referenced, that if home is home base, and setting the example, the analogy about swinging, right? Making these relatable role-playing opportunities that you had with your children, where you sat with them and you talked them through ways that they could deal with what they couldn't control. And using creativity in order to do that kind of role-playing really enabled you to pass on some of the experience that you've had, how you learned to deal with interactions in the world, but also how they might be able to better process the incoming, whether it's someone who was cruel on the playground or something that they couldn't do that they really wanted to do. You talk about your son wanting to learn how to play guitar, and you already talked a little bit about the fact that you felt like even though you had all this history, you made mistakes too. And I think
that was Katie Memo about wanting to play guitar, actually. But
oh
yes.
gosh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know. There are lots of wonderful stories in the book, but I think what you said about that you'll make mistakes even when you think you're doing the right thing, right? Like if your child wants to do something that you don't think that they would be capable of doing, allowing them to try it and gain that kind of independence is something that you weren't initially comfortable with, but then you learned that lesson as well as your children did.
So just to unpack a lot of things. So one thing is that, the chapter Let Go and Let Live is an important chapter, because I think any parent, that my enemy of fear, we all sort of have that, where, we naturally are afraid, especially when you have a really small, child, and what can they do or not do and so forth, particularly if you're parenting a child that's different or disabled or so forth. And so the mental strength it takes to actually, lean out and allow them to blossom in the way that they deserve. And by the way, maybe they'll fail and maybe they won't, and maybe they'll succeed, but they got a chance to try. And I have witnessed parents who, are even I think I wrote in the book, I had a cousin who's like, it's a good thing your parents are your parents, because I'd never let you out. And I remember hearing her say that, and I thought, oh my gosh, I always took the way my parents raised me for granted. I mean, they just allowed me to explore every single thing. I mean, oh my gosh. At one point, so I played trombone, and I was a cheerleader, and I decided that I had to do both. And it actually reminds me of your daughter, Esme, Ryan, and Teresa, but in that sense, I decided that I would change from my cheerleading outfit into my marching band uniform, so I could play the trombone across the field during halftime and then switch back. But, that's all because my parents just really, really supported me in whatever I wanted to do. Now, the other thing that you were touching on, or at least in my head you were touching on it, which I think is really, really important. I spent a lot of time in the book forecasting behaviors, and I remember when I did it, I thought, uh-oh, is this gonna get cut from the book? Because, in some respects, I'm really holding a mirror up, not just for parents of kids that are different or disabled, but sort of society at large. Now, the reason I do that in different angles and ways in the book is so that, forecasting for kids is, as I said, it's like, giving Wonder Woman, her golden handcuffs. I mean, it gives them this sort of, and no one wants to be blindsided, none of us. And so when you have a child that is experiencing life in their own version of normal, capable of doing anything and everything, the way that they can, they still have to endure a lot of different things that other children don't. And so by saying, here's the type of kids that are gonna react to you, and know that. And I put them in categories, and by doing that, what I watched for my own children was, sometimes it would actually work even almost like as a wink wink. So if there was a curious cat and they just couldn't stop asking questions, they knew it was coming. We'd call them, we're like, that curious cat in the car on the way home. And that is truly, truly a gift that parents or grandparents or caregivers can give to these kids. Because remember, if you have only the ability to worry about the things you can do something about, what you can do for them is just arm them with that anticipation and knowledge. And that gives them that sort of strength to not only handle it in the moment, but actually move on.
And I think that one of the things that we as parents of children who are disabled or different is that we can't control what already has passed. And for those who are born with disability or who develop any sort of visible or invisible difference, we don't have control over that, and that can be one of the most disempowering thing about being a parent. And I think that is also true probably for every parent in the world, where you need to decide to allow your child to be who your child wants to be. But that's also very difficult when you are a parent of a disabled child, because you want to know, you spend a lot of time wanting to know why. And you talked about that in terms of your own diagnosis that you didn't learn until you were older. But you want to look back and say, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And how do you suggest that people who may spend some time in that often dark place, because we can't always or ever know why, how do you talk them through that particularly difficult question?
So I want to get to the first chapter. It's called Embracing the New Normal, about parents in a second. But I want to be abundantly clear that a parent of a child who is different or disabled, they are so blessed. It is the biggest gift. There is so much joy, deeper than you could have ever imagined. And so many people sort of, when you have children, and our daughter is, doesn't have the same type of genetic difference that our sons do, but there's an assumption they can do anything, and then your life is, sort of having them, helping them bring down, kind of come down from that, pinnacle of you can do anything. But when you have a child that's different or disabled, it's really like every step in the direction of their own creativity and everything. It's just a wonderful gift, and it's also a gift because, and I can tell you in comparison with my daughter and my sons, the only, when you have this body or life, or, and of course there's invisible differences, and we can get to that too, and there's stories about that in the book. But I always say, I weeded out, and as our sons too, we weed out the jerks. I mean, only the most wonderful. Can you imagine living a life in a bubble of love? Any person, child who has a disability difference, they're in their bubble of love. Only the most incredible, wonderful people are going to want to be friends with them, date them, marry them. They don't have to deal and waste their time with those superficial people. And I mean, how incredible is that? Every parent would want that for their kids, but only the parents of children that are different or disabled actually get that for that child, and that is incredible. Now, on the first chapter, I hope that makes sense.
Yes.
So chapter 1 is then called Embracing the New Normal in terms of how I got there. I really wanted to write a chapter first focusing on the parents themselves, because experiencing something, whether it happens when you're born or along the way, it's still a shift, it's still a new chapter, it's something unexpected. And so for me, I had to really let go of the concept of perfection, which is funny considering how I physically look. But really, I had to sort of let go of the fact that I could have the, quote unquote, perfect child. And I thought in terms of the movie Moonstruck, which, if you're over a certain age, you've seen it, and even if you're not, go see it. But, in that movie, and I write about this in the first chapter, this was my first little step towards healing in that sense, because, and even though I joke, at one point Cher, slaps Nicolas Cage's character and is like, snap out of it. Well, that's not realistic. But at some point, she's like, snowflakes are perfect, stars are perfect, not us, not us. And, once I started letting go of that notion of perfection, it really started to make me it was almost like a seismic shift of a mental state that none of us are perfect. None of our children are perfect, whether it's visible or invisible. Letting go of that notion was the right step in towards my, being able to say, well, wait a minute, I didn't do anything wrong here, or nothing is wrong with my child. If anything, I did something absolutely right, and this was right for them. And they have that saying and expression, it's sort of like you're given, if you're more religious, it would be from a God perspective for sure. Like, if God gives you what you can handle. And I always feel that that is so, so true. We handle the things that maybe they're unanticipated, but in fact, we do have the strength. We didn't think we did, or we didn't know we had it, but we have it.
I think that that relates back to some other sections throughout the book, but that are sort of this misperceived heroism that sometimes that as a parent, or even someone who has a disability, but as a parent of a child with disability, I certainly have heard a lot, I don't know how you do it, or I couldn't do it. And I think what I would say to anyone who needs to hear it is that you will learn to do it. It's a skill set like any other skill set. No one instantly knows how to parent a child whose needs you may not even understand.
Right? So, just someone, the remarks, and which is in the first chapter, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
please.
People will blurt out, for some reason, when you're a parent of a child who has a difference or disability, people feel the need to say something often, and it's typically something that is awkward or, or so forth. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's, and again, that's going back a little bit to the question of how do we encourage people to reach out, and how do we encourage people to offer help while it's such a thorny topic, right?
Yeah, so, I also have this day job. I'm a lawyer on Wall Street, so there you go. So, and I think a lot about, and I do a lot of diversity and inclusion speaking to companies, and people are constantly focused on, how do we engage, or, I want someone to feel comfortable, and how do I approach them? And there's all those kind of questions that are appropriate and right, and definitely understand. The one thing that I think is interesting is it's all about how do we approach them so these people can talk about themselves or not, whatever. And I always think, well, have you decided to be vulnerable about yourself first? Have you been willing to share? And so it seems like there has to be this, starting with that other person, how do I make them feel comfortable? How do I make certain that I'm saying the right thing about them? And I'm thinking, why don't you say something about yourself? And truly in an authentic way. And by the way, and if you don't feel comfortable doing that, and if you don't have the strength to share authentically about yourself, then why would you expect the other person to have to do that in the way that they might not feel comfortable?
Which I think is a challenge in a society where we optimize achievements and what's the next thing we're doing and how are we going to get there and what are we going to collect, and parenting a child with difference or disability, or having difference or disability often, I don't know if I would say like your timing is different than other people's, right? Like you live in a different, with a different beat to your lives. It may be slower because it takes longer to get somewhere. To get my child out the door takes probably about an hour, right? And there aren't spontaneous moments really for us. It reminds me of the family mottos. One of the ones that we have is, we're here for a good time, not a long time. Because my son only had, as I mentioned, I thought about having him come here and last about 5 minutes because he'd want to go watch trains. But he might go in the children's area for a little while. But that, you will convince yourself to not go places and do things if you expect to have the same experience at the event that other people and other people's children have. And if you decide to have your own experience for however long you can manage to do it, even if you drive 30 minutes to get there, you can come to peace with that a little bit better, so that having those family mottos or those words to live by and where you can sort of live to your own rhythm is often really helpful.
First of all, thank you for sharing that. You just made me think about that concept of expectations. So outside of this space, I remember I was talking to one of my closest friends, and someone was doing something, whatever, and at some point we decided to live our lives. We're like, wait, let's just stop expecting from that person. And once we stop expecting from that person, we just take them as is, and then we're not so frustrated. And so if I take it in the concept of as a parent, of a child, with difference or disability, whatever the label someone, and I always say just, whatever the family, let's give them the grace and respect to label however they want to label. That's why I cover both words. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to expectations, and that's the key. That, just letting go of expectations and allowing these kids to step sort of through that and thrive. The minute that you let go of that, the kids, I know it sounds weird, but I think somehow they can feel the pressure of it. Right. And when you let go of it, it's sort of like they get this freedom in that sense. And to your point about family mottos, it is about the joy. It's not about the time getting to the joy. Joy is joy. Whether we get it tomorrow, we get it today, or whatever the case may be.
That's wonderful. I have a note here that has expectations and how we always wanted a book that was what to expect when you get the unexpected versus the very common pregnancy book, which is what to get.
Yeah, I mentioned it in the book.
Yes, you did.
What to expect when expected.
Thank you. I just blinked out on it because I like my title better. But so let's return back to this sort of, I don't know how you do it, in this sense of heroism or, as I say, building a skill set. for people who are feeling like they're drowning or feeling like they're unprepared or even incapable of meeting the moment, that there are certain ways that you can develop, whether it's a family motto or whether it's a role-playing situation with your child where you can develop these skills. What are some of the other things you put into practice for your children to prepare them for
So
the world?
there's and especially for children with physical disabilities and differences, I have a chapter, it's called The Helping Hand, and I purposely put it in there because, on the one hand, you're building their dignity and you're leaning out so that they can, blossom in the way that they deserve to thrive and, in their own version of normal, capable of doing anything and everything within their means. And then the world comes to swoop in and sort of like Mighty Mouse save the day, and help them constantly. And I go through that intensely, and I mock myself by calling myself actually a praying mantis at some point because I got really mad at him. But in terms of the types of things I would do for the kids, in that chapter I really do cover, here are the types of, this is not behaviors of others, these are the type of behaviors you might have when someone is approaching you. And you could be, looking around, trying to do something, and someone is, sorry, you're not looking around, you're trying to do something and someone sort of interferes with that. Or, so I guess what I'm saying is in similar ways to the forecasting, Sally, it's like that. It's giving that insight of behavioral, futuristic moments that say to them, here's how people are going to react to you, here are the different types of ways you can manage and handle yourself, and here's what makes sense. Mm-hmm. And there's one more thing I want to say about that chapter. I thought it was a really important chapter because I'm very embarrassed that I used to get mad. Gosh, right? People are trying to be kind, which is a good thing. But at the end of the day, as I taught our sons, sometimes even though we have to swallow our pride, and quite frankly, siblings will feel really defensive and pissed off too, sorry. They'll get mad too, like, back off my sister or brother, like, let them just be, But at the end of the day, the reason that we teach our children to be gracious about it with a thank you or no thank you is because sometimes we have a role to play in terms of, that person, if we really bite their heads off and trying to help us, our children or our sibling or whatever, that same person is going to hold back. Mm-hmm. They're going to actually, we've thwarted future kindness. Right. Like, what have I done? So that is an important element to it all. And a child that is different or disabled, they do have that noble, and their siblings as well, and family members, role to play to think about themselves in sort of the greater societal sense of it all.
Right. I love that one of the things that comes from this forecasting is also giving your child choice. Yeah. Right? A choice in how to deal with situations where it isn't just, well, you're just going to have to take it, or, well, we won't go anywhere because we don't want to confront situations like this, but you can react like this if you're feeling this way. You can, say something kind and then leave, and it empowers them to make choices over their bodies and how they're seen.
Something you're saying really is so critical because you're reminding me that for many of us, myself included, but it's so easy to sort of say the easy thing, like everybody needs help. Look, people try to help me and I'm fine about it. But really, that is well intentioned, but from a kid that's receiving something constantly that can impact their sense of self, their dignity, their ability to achieve unconditional self-love. You've got to be a lot deeper than that. And in terms of, instead of everyone needs help, it's saying, like, how does it make you feel when people are trying to help? When do I feel good when someone's trying to help me? When do I not like it? Get deeper than just sort of the surface level discussion about it. Right. And that, again, is for not only those children, but their families.
One of the things that you wrote about is learning to or committing to passing it forward, paying it forward. So if someone is kind to you, being able to give a sort of longevity to that moment, that it isn't just about that moment where someone opens the door or holds the door and you're thinking, well, I could have got the door myself, but that it is actually about sculpting the world in a way, because the people who are sensitive to meeting those kinds of adaptations have a responsibility to bring kindness.
You're just making me laugh, because I think you're talking about, so there's one part of the book where people used to, or conductors on trains, used to give me a discounted ticket. And I get really mad. I'm like, no, I'm going to pay full price. And they're like, no, you don't have to. I'm like, no, I don't want to, whatever. It was,
Yeah.
But at some point, I realized, I'm like, wait a minute. If I'm fortunate enough to be able to pay the full price, because not everyone, some people really could use that, and that's an important thing. But for myself, I'm like, wait a minute, why don't I just accept that, and then for any money that I save on tickets, I donate it to my favorite nonprofits, and just pay it forward. There's a lot of beautiful ways that we can take someone else's kindness, and even if in our own shoes, or for our children, it doesn't mean that we can't just make the interaction stop there. There's a lot of good we can do.
Right. I think that one of the ways that we can help share
Sorry, including my nonprofits. I didn't flaunt it.
It's like, seriously, take it seriously. No, one of the interactions that most of us who either have a disability or difference, or have children with disability or difference, one of the interactions we often have are with lots of professionals, whether they're medical professionals or educators or caregivers or therapists, or really our lives are filled with all of these types of relationships. And it seems to me that this book would be an excellent read for those people as well. And if you want to talk a little bit about just how critical getting a better understanding of what parents who are raising children with disability or difference, how that can really help in these professional settings.
Yeah, it's really important, right? When I was writing this, and actually when we were selling the book and it went to auction and it was sold, and so I had to interview with a bunch of publishing houses, and they're like, who's this book for? And I'm like, well, it's definitely for parents of children with differences in disabilities, physical and then also invisible, and I'm going to pull in a lot of stories from other families. But to your point, I think this book has to be for teachers and educators, and at the end of the day, at some point, if our children can get to a point of going independently to, and they do, whether it's a special needs program or mainstreams, they're going to be with teachers that need that that type of insight. And unless those teachers themselves, and by the way, I come from a family of teachers, so it's not no disrespect to teachers.
Yeah.
It's more just about my hope is that this book provides insight, because I think so many times teachers focus on and understandably, like, how do I help this child? How can I support this child? I talk about that even in one of the chapters in my book. But for me, it's sort of like, well, wait a minute. I want you, as much as I want you to empower my child who's a student in your classroom, I really want you to help the entire classroom gain the ability to have empathy and help them to realize that, we all have our version of one finger to hide if we want to feel ashamed about something. And in fact, while no one, necessarily has the same life experience, certainly not in the classroom and so forth of these kids, once they understand they can feel the same as that other kid, that's key. And so for me, that audience of teachers is so, so critical.
I think also the amount of, we talked very early on, we're sort of circling back to safe spaces and safe people, right? And The angels in my life and in my child's life have been the therapists and have been the teachers, the classroom assistants, and you literally feel that angels have been revealed to you in some way because you see where the goodness is, and the more people that we can influence to have that same experience, I think the better the world becomes.
I love that so much. I completely agree.
Unfortunately, I cannot believe this. It is 3:55. I know we started a little bit late, and I don't know if we have passable microphones, but I'm wondering if anybody has any questions for Meg or has any stories that you would like to tell. And we can keep going for the next 5 minutes if you don't. If you just want to keep hearing us talk.
Chloe does.
Oh, Chloe has a question.
Yay.
Did you ever get a refund from Reese? Did you ever get a refund from the fortune teller?
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. So Chloe has read my book. And she just asked, did I ever get away from her, did you say?
A refund.
A refund.
A refund. Yeah, that's even funnier. She's so funny.
Good question.
Okay, so here's the deal. My biggest fear, remember fear was the worst sense of self of anything I experienced, but I was so afraid of having a child that was born with my condition that I would go see psychics. And, and one in particular was named Reese, and I write about her in the book, and she would tell me that she, I would never have children that were born like me and so forth, and in fact, they'll not have, one finger like you have, and I had to make a mental check, oh, well, what about my feet? Are they gonna have anyway? So that's really funny, Chloe, because at the end of the day, I did not get a refund. It paid that woman a lot of money, and it was really, and I talk about it, that it was a really bizarro experience because I had just gotten this incredible job out of law school, and so professionally my career was taking such flight, and I had never been so pathetic. So you know what? Thankfully, she was mistaken, and most importantly, at the end of the day, if she needed that money, then oh well, that's okay. She can have that money, and I won in the end because I had beautiful children that share my condition, and I'm so proud of them. All 3 of them, actually.
Well, that's great. I'm so glad that you have made 3 children.
Thank you, Chloe, so
By the way, I
much.
have another question.
Oh. All right, Chloe, let's hear it.
All right, so that lady at her house, was her name Belvan, or I don't remember the name, but did she ever warm up to you?
Your
In Afghanistan.
Afghanistan.
Oh, okay, so I had a nanny I wrote about, in the introduction, I read the introduction at the beginning before you guys got here, but that was just at a very superficial level, and then actually in one of the chapters I go into it, much deeper. And no, at the end of the day, it never changed, and I will say, having lived in the Middle East and South Asia, I think that societal, norms are very different than they are in the United States, especially in regions like Afghanistan. So for her name was Gul Begum, and she was my nanny, and she was afraid of me, but thankfully, and I talked about this, I think even last night at another book event, right, Debbie? But that the most important thing was that I went to my mom that night because she looked in she thought if I looked in her eyes that she would be cursed, her family would be cursed, or if she touched me and so forth. And so I kept saying, well, Mommy, you told me that there's nothing wrong with me. And my mom said to me, well, that's for us to know and everybody to find out. And I think that's the point. So the fact that I didn't sort of move the needle with Gul Begum, that's okay. And most importantly, I think I evolved. Thank you for the great questions, Chloe.
All right, I just think it's just so weird that this lady gave you a fake name, and I just thought I didn't know that she would go that far. It just was a little too far.
That lady, it's her loss, honestly.
Thank you.
Truer words have never been spoken.
Right.
That was her loss.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything?
Do you ever find that kids are cruel growing up in school? How do you deal with that?
Well, I wrote an entire chapter on this subject. It's called Take the Bully by the Horns. And I'm glad you asked that question because actually one of the most important things that we have to do as parents of kids that are different or disabled is actually help them distinguish between curiosity and cruelty. Something that is innocent can feel cruel, but it doesn't mean it was intentionally cruel. And we have to, work through that with them so that they can distinguish. But the reason I am glad you asked the question too is, most of us, so my son Ethan was bullied on the playground when he was in first grade for being different. And so I did want to cover the cruelty topic and how he handled it and managed it for sure. But at the end of the day, most parents that have a child born or, happens along the way that are different or disabled, we just want to make certain they have the right pals and friends. And, it's my view, there's a lot of campaigns like choose kindness, be kind. I'm sure Chloe can tell you, and Connor too, right? Like kindness is not enough. We need friendship. Like that's what any of us needs. Any child needs that. And so to me, what they deserve is more than the kindness. And then if the cruelty emerges, which it can, but it's less frequent, and I have been, of course, talked to my kids about how that has much more to do with themselves. I mean, the bully versus themselves. But the last chapter really covers it and how I got them through it.
I found that chapter to be really informative just from reflecting back on my childhood and how that, how I was treated as a child and how that formed my self-perception of myself and some of the strategies that you have in the book. If I had been fortunate enough to have been taught those things, and all credit to my parents, they love me very much, but just having some of those strategies to put into place, I think you'll come away with a lot in this book from that.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Do you talk in your book, and I'm gonna buy it and make sure I get your autograph. Do you talk in your book about how, as a parent who gets a diagnosis, either we know it because we've seen it, if it's a physical diagnosis, or we've come to learn that later on in life. Do you talk about how the model that we see in society as, like, we see it as from a medical point of view, right, instead of a social point of view. So a lot of the times, before we can even learn to love and learn to know this human being, you're automatically sort of given this pity and this sort of like,
Yeah, I mean, yes, chapter 1. It's called Embracing the New Normal, and it's so much about exploring that and managing it and handling it and, quite frankly, pushing through it and persevering. And actually, I was so happy because I channeled Amy Cuddy, who's this renowned psychologist, and actually she tweeted out my book last week on Twitter. I'm like, thank you. But definitely a lot of strategies with respect to that. That concept of pity is you're spot on, and it's sort of how to navigate through it and everything. And that's why I wrote that chapter first. I felt like, how can I possibly have parents jump to the conversation about supporting their kids if they haven't really developed and built that mental strength themselves. If we want, if we expect our kids to be strong mental health or otherwise, or the strongest versions of themselves, how can we expect that if we haven't ourselves achieved that type of strength?
just seems like sometimes we're set up, like the system is set up to, instead of really building off those strengths, we're set up to on deficits, right? And so that's the focus, the deficit, instead of really, okay, what do we have?
Well, I mean, Sally read the book. What do you think? Do you think I covered?
Yes, I was trying to think of a way to succinctly or quickly say that there is.
Thank you for the question.
Yes. I think some of what addresses that in here is that words matter, right? You just use the word deficit, right? And I had the word discrepancy used for my body a lot when I was young, and you talk about that as well. And when we talk about disability and difference and what all of those words mean and how professionals use those words, and if anyone sits in a school meeting where all you do is talk about what your child can't do, and you leave that meeting and you think, well, yeah, then, so some of that is in here, and I also think that there is, let's see if I can resurrect the other thing I was going to say about that. Oh no, I was going to say something really good about the book, and now I can't remember. I was thinking about too many things. But I do think that the other thing that you do talk about in here for that is that the world we create for ourselves and for our children, and again, we're back to the home base, we're back to the safe spaces and safe places and the safe people, that world that we create has to, as you say, start from your own inner strength and building that strength with your children, but finding those places where your child is nothing but capable. Sometimes you have to search them out. There are some, as you know, with Independence First, or there are a number of places here in Milwaukee that I've had 18 years trying to find where I can go, and it's not about the space being and not adapting to us, but is actually made for us. And that is an incredible experience. And there are those places out there and those people out there, and we do have to do a little extra work to find them.
Yeah.
But they're there.
Yeah, and just one final thought is that I didn't mention this concept, which is in the book. It's my favorite motto, which is "What you think of me is none of my business." And another layer in that book is don't let anyone take your power away from you. And your power is self-love and self-acceptance and confidence and all those kind of things. And so that is why I wrote the chapter, because I've come to a place where I used to hide my hands when I was little. I mean, I didn't want people to stare at me, and I just loathed it. And then when I got to this place of like, wow, I really have so much joy. I'm grateful the way I physically look. It's brought me the most incredible experiences and people and all these good kind of things. The types of things that you're talking about, or whether it's glances of pity or actual expressions or anything, it doesn't matter, and to me, and I've been able to achieve, is one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, because we were talking about control in the beginning. You cannot control those, they're gonna come no matter, even if you read my book 20 times, go ahead, because you can even listen to me on the Audible. But truly, it's really about your own sort of ability to deflect and gain that inner strength, and hopefully that the book will help you out with that.
That is, there's so much in here. Does anyone else have any last thing? We're a little over. Yeah.
I just want to say that you have so much perspective as the mother who has a difference, talking all about being raised and how it went for you, and then the children as well. It's like a power pack. It's really, really good.
That's well said.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate
It's
it.
really special.
I'm going to do my closing here, and I'm sure as you go up and sign books, if anyone has any comments or questions, as we are well over time. But I would love to close with a poem, and I know poetry touches you, and I think this isn't the poem from your book, but you all will read it when you get it. That means a lot to me, and one that I believe further expresses why your book is so welcome. And it's called This poem is The World I Live In by Mary Oliver. I have refused to live locked in the orderly house of reasons and proofs. The world I live in and believe in is wider than that. And anyway, what's wrong with maybe? You wouldn't believe what once or twice I've seen. I'll just tell you this. Only if there are angels in your head will you ever possibly see one. And Born Extraordinary is a book that will help parents to embrace the unknown in life while raising a different or disabled child, and being able to do that, Meg Zucker tells us, is exactly what will allow them to imagine the extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming.